Welcome to our monthly multidiscipline webinar hosted by ICAT, ISPI Potomac, and the Professionista LLC. This month's topic is a continuation from last month in a series that we like to call Engineering in Everyday Life, addressing the global grand challenges of the 21st century, Part 2. We invite you to expand your horizons as you tune in to today's webinar. Our expert panel of presenters features emerging technological thinkers and thought leaders who will discuss some of the grand challenges for engineering in the 21st century, from energy and sustainability and health and wellness, climate change, and even the joy of living. We will begin shortly, but in the meantime, join us in the chat. Please provide your full name so we can greet you. So we're so glad to have Tamra Nagera from New Orleans. Great to see you. Great to see you as well, Michael from Gainesboro, Virginia, Terry from Washington, D.C., Gabe from the suburbs of Washington, D.C. We are so glad to have you with us live today. And also, we know that many of our guests are tuning in not only from the U.S., but overseas as well. So continue to share your city and country along with your name so that we can see just how global our reach has become. If you are tuning in live and haven't already done so, go ahead and let us know your full name and where you're tuning in from so that we can greet you in the chat. Now, this month's multidiscipline webinar, which we host, this monthly multidiscipline webinar, which we host on the fourth Thursday of each month at noon Eastern Time, is intended for professionals and leaders who want to develop a multidisciplinary awareness of various disciplines ranging from emerging and trending technologies, organizational improvement, engineering, data analytics, social transformation, and other topics. The webinar is recorded and circulated for the benefit of professionals who are within our circle. Now, did you know that ICAT Professional Services is a social enterprise with a purpose to enhance employability and create jobs in our community? That's right. ICAT Professional Services is an organization that is committed to making your people and data greater. ICAT Consulting is your partner for professional development, talent source, data analytics, and societal impact. Service offerings include Career Academy, outsourcing, staffing, and recruitment, applied data analytics, and social enterprise. So to learn more about ICAT Professional Services, please visit www.icat.net. Now, ICAT offers the following 5 credentialed programs: Scaled Agile Product Owner, Product Manager, or POPM for short, CompTIA A+, CompTIA Network Plus, CompTIA Security Plus, and Agile Instructional Design Practitioner. So for the career seekers tuning in, you may be wondering how to make yourself stand out as you apply for positions in your field. While credentials such as these and other skills may get you in the door, employment readiness is what makes you stand out from other candidates in the minds of interviewers and decision makers. So ICAT also offers a series of employment readiness experiences that prepare you to stand out. These experiences include certification exam prep, portfolio development, informational interviews, cohort peer support, coaching support, professionalism development, and more. So if you want to learn more about how ICAT takes job seekers from novice to highly trained professional, visit www.icat.net. Now, these enriching monthly multidiscipline webinars would not be possible without the support of our sponsors. We will now share a few details about our sponsor organizations. And as we share, Feel free to take a screenshot of the companies and organizations that you would like to connect with. First, we have ISPI Potomac. ISPI Potomac is the professional home for innovative leaders, educators, consultants, and designers in federal, state, and local government, as well as international development, education, and non-government organizations around the world. Members of ISPI Potomac share a commitment to community, collaboration, and co-creation to help make our world a better place for all. Our next co-sponsor is the Professionista LLC. The Professionista LLC brings your brand to life with creative storytelling and communication strategies that connect with your audience. From virtual events to in-person experiences, the company's founder, yours truly, Jody Ann Bigby, speaks life into your content and your strategy in a way that is compelling, enriching, and memorable. The Professionista LLC specializes in brand storytelling strategy, communication strategy, empowerment keynotes, and voiceover artistry. Because what's a communication strategy without a voice to deliver it? So if your organization needs the right voice, a powerful voice, to carry your message to your market in a way that makes you unforgettable and makes them want to work with you, text your organization's name and the word voice to 678-694-7763 today. For those of you who are joining us live, you have several webinar tools that you can use to enhance your experience. We invite you to engage in the chat and share any questions, comments, suggestions, and more that you may have. And if time permits, and we're able to open the floor for Q&A, you may raise your hand virtually to ask a question and use the unmute feature to ask your question live when you are called upon. We do ask that all video remains off throughout the webinar and audio remain on mute unless you're called upon to speak. Keeping video and audio off helps to keep the focus on the presentation at hand. So we thank you in advance for honoring these standards. If you're joining from the Zoom mobile app or desktop site, the place to make your presence known is in our chat. Let us know what you think of the webinar in the chat area. We appreciate your feedback and thank you for it in advance. If you join by dialing in from a phone, we encourage you to update your Zoom settings to display your name and where you're tuning in from instead of your phone number so that we can acknowledge you. Now let's jump right into the main event. Again, I am Jody Ann Bigby, and I will be moderating today's panel on the topic, Engineering in Everyday Life, addressing the global brand challenges of the 21st century. From urban centers to remote corners of Earth, the depths of the oceans to space, humanity has always sought to transcend barriers, overcome challenges, and create opportunities that improve life in our part of the universe. In the last century alone, many great engineering achievements became so commonplace that we now take them mostly for granted. For example, technology allows an abundant supply of food for safe drinking water for much of the world. It provides electricity for many of our daily activities. We can travel the globe with relative ease and bring goods and services wherever they're needed. As remarkable as these engineering achievements are, many more great challenges and opportunities remain to be realized. This webinar will explore the technological possibilities and engineering solutions that are just within our grasp, as well as some that lie just beyond our imaginations. Today's multidiscipline webinar features experts in engineering. First, we will hear from Tamra Nagira, field service engineer, who will speak on engineering challenges of today's energy sources. He will be followed by Asma Idrisu, systems engineer, who will present part 2 of her topic, climate change, adaptivity, and agility. Finally, you will hear from Jonathan Tessier, professional performance coach and the leader for today's webinar, who will round out the discussion with visual literacy and creativity in the engineering mindset. I am pleased to introduce our first panelist, Tamra Nagira. Mr. Tamra Nagira is a highly skilled field service representative in the field of engineering for nearly a decade. He holds a Bachelor's of Science in Electrical Engineering from BYU, Idaho, and has worked for Solar Turbines, a Caterpillar company, for 5 years. He saves clients millions of dollars each year by maintaining the industrial gas turbines that generate power for hospitals, schools, offshore oil rigs, and more. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Tamrat Nagira. Hello, Tamrat. How are you today?
Hello, Jody Ann. Thank you very much for the kind introduction.
Absolutely. Thank you for being with us today and contributing your expertise to this webinar.
My pleasure.
Wonderful. So go ahead and share with the audience a little more about who you are, as well as a little known fact about engineering from the perspective of technological advancement.
Okay, well, I came to the United States from Ethiopia to pursue my engineering education, and I worked for a couple of energy and engineering design firms while I was going to school. After obtaining my electrical engineering degree, I've been working in the gas and oil industry as a gas turbine field engineer. Usually when I meet people, they ask me, what are gas turbines? You know, we don't see them usually in our area. So I'll give you an example. If you take the engine of an airplane and build it bigger, let's say as big as a bus, now you have an industrial gas turbine that you can use to generate power for universities, for hospitals, for factories, and offshore oil rigs. Most of our customers are offshore oil rigs who are disconnected from electrical grid, and they use these gas turbines to generate power. So as a field engineer, I go out to different customer sites and make sure the turbines are installed correctly, they are functioning correctly, and they are maintained properly. The other one, something interesting about technological civilization regarding our potential in harnessing energy. According to one of the renowned physicists, Dr. Michio Kaku, there are type 1, type 2, and type 3 civilizations. If you will go to the next slide, please. So type 1 civilization is when we can harness the planetary power. That is when we can control volcanoes, the weather, the earthquakes to harness energy. And type 2 civilization is a stellar civilization. This is when we have exhausted our planet energy and now we can harness the energy from the sun. And type 3 civilization is a galactic civilization. At this stage, the energy of the sun would not be enough, and we hope from start to harness our energy. So based on this scale, what is our current civilization stage? This is a question for the group, so you can give your answer in the chat box. I'll give you guys like 10 or 15 seconds. So that's based on the examples I gave you above. Where do you think our civilization stage is at?
Well, Michael in the audience, he says type 2.
Okay, so that would be the stellar civilization.
Mm-hmm. And I'd like to guess type 1.
Okay, that's where we can harness the planetary power. Okay.
And Gabe has guessed type 1 as well.
Okay, thank you everybody for your contribution. So based on this scale, our civilization type is actually below type 1. It is, let's call it type 0 civilization. We don't even rate on this scale because we are currently getting majority of our energy from dead plants. If you will go to the next slide, please. So if we see just the energy consumption of US, majority of our energies, they come the fossil fuels. As you can see, natural gas 32%, petroleum 37%, coal 11%. So fossil fuel constitutes more than 60% of 70% of our energy consumption. So the history of use of fossil fuels is centuries old. Coal, oil, and gas have been the world's most dominant source of energy since the 1800s. Fossil fuels have changed Earth's history and the way of life as we know it for both good and bad. And the world has a crippling dependence on fossil fuels. And this dependence on fossil fuel is one of the largest causes of to the biggest problems we're facing today, which is the climate change. Climate change leads to problems such as sea level rise, desertification, and unpredictable weather events. If you would go to the next slide, please. So why are we still dependent on fossil fuels? Next slide, please. And so the first challenge that we have is infrastructure. Since fossil fuels have been the dominant source of our energy during the entirety of the development of industrialized world, all our systems from production to transportation to residential are set up for their use. The switching to another energy source would mean completely rethinking the way we live and the way we understand energy. The other one is, the second one is politics and economics. Many countries' economy is dependent from the money they get from through selling oil and gas. And those countries are reluctant in investing an alternate source of energy. And then the other challenge that we have is the state of renewable energy that we have today. That is the initial cost, the first one. This is one of the biggest challenges of harnessing and utilizing solar power and wind power because it costs a lot of money to invest on the initial projects. The other is the space constraints. One has to have the kind of space required for installing enough solar panels to generate significant amount of power. And another challenge is location. And you will have to have a part of the world which have sunny climates throughout the year to make a greater use of solar energy. And another challenge that we have also is a storage challenge. Those solar powered battery chargers have made it possible for solar energy to be used. Even during the night, the storage and portability remain the main challenge of solar power. So the transition to alternate resources is inevitable due to dwindling availability of conventional resources and the need to lower our greenhouse gas emissions. And so if you go to the next slide, we will see the engineering challenge of today's energy sources. And so the first challenge that we engineers work on is how can we make the energy sources that we have clean. One thing our company, Solar Turbine, is implementing is what's called a Solenox system. Solenox system is a design where you mix the right amount of fuel and air to reduce the nitrogen monoxide emission and the carbon monoxide emissions. And also we see some of the petrol stations they use ethanol made from natural resources. And this ethanols, they burn a slightly cleaner and emit fewer pollutants than regular gasoline. And then the other challenge that we have is having a stable grid. Because wind and solar power production depend on the weather, they are variable. This variability of wind and solar power introduces unique challenge to those who must maintain the constant balance between energy, supply, and demand required for a stable electric power grid. Unless and until energy storage is economical, flexibility in the power grid is the key to its efficient operation. The other challenge that engineers work on day and night is how can we have our energy sources sustainable? The most often quoted definition of sustainability comes from a UN World Commission on Environment and Development. Sustainable development is a development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their needs. In simplest terms, sustainability is about our children and our grandchildren and the world we live in them. So in conclusion, how are we doing in combating our energy challenge? Major advancements have been made in terms of efficiency and storage when it comes to renewable energy. Renewable energy is becoming increasingly more competitive with fossil fuels. For example, solar electricity is now cheaper to produce in Dubai than electricity coming from gas turbines. And some countries are increasingly powering their energy needs with renewables. A wonderful example is Denmark, where more than 40% of energy comes from wind power alone. The US has agreed to cut its greenhouse gas emissions by 26 to 28% by 2015 and by 80% by 2050 compared to 2005 levels. At the same time, we have witnessed a number of technological breakthroughs such as the Tesla Powerwall, the home battery that can power most homes during the evening using electricity generated by solar panels or the utility grid during the day. And so these are some of the, engineers are working on in order to combat the challenge that we have in today's energy sources. If you have any questions, please put your questions in the chat and I'll be glad to answer them.
Thank you so much for this compelling presentation. I do have a question. Is being a type 1 planet, just referring back to your opening question,
yes.
is that a good thing for us to be, or should we be further along? What are your thoughts?
Definitely. If we can harness, let's say, if we can harness the volcanoes that we have, like some countries now, they use the geothermal energy in order to produce electricity. So if we can use the weather, which is the wind, and to produce energy, if we can use the earthquakes to harness our energy, that would be an amazing progress towards harnessing energy of the planet.
Wonderful. Are there any other questions from our audience? We'd love to hear from you. And if not, we will hold all further Q&A to the end. Okay, so we will wait to the end for any further questions. Thank you so much, Tamrat, for your presentation.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Well, for our next panelist, we have Asma Idrisu. Asma Idrisu is a highly experienced systems engineer who specializes in planning and organizing analytical information and establishing strategies needed to facilitate executive-level decision-making. She has developed quality training programs to support staff development and enhance organizational learning at all levels. She has supported the U.S. Census Bureau's Office of Systems Engineering on training methodology, content, and facilitation for socialization of tools, including needs assessments, development, design, implementation, and evaluation. Asma serves on the board of directors for the Small Business Association for International Companies, or SBAIC, as the communications co-chair, where she collaborates with industry leaders and executives to promote best practices and policies that support U.S. small businesses. Today, Inseptima consults and advises companies in the fields of technology, climate change, and energy. Hello, Asma. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you so much, Tiffany, for introducing me, and also Tamrat for actually giving me a very nice segue into my topic today. and giving me a nice introduction on climate change and renewable energy. So appreciate that.
Well, without further ado, tell us a little bit more about your topic and, a little known fact about engineering and climate change.
Yeah, so my topic is kind of like is going to piggyback off of what Tamara was talking about, climate change impacts and how we are using technology today and engineering technologies to be able to renew energy. And so I would start by asking the question, how many tons of carbon do you think we produce as a nation, as in the world? How many tons of carbon do we produce per year? Can you guess?
At this time, those of you who are joining us live, we'd love to hear or see your guesses in the chat.
It could be in the millions, billions, or trillions. Just
Thank you for the hint.
Hints there.
Thank you for that, Asma. So let's see what we have in the chat. Can you repeat the question one more time for our guests?
How many tons of carbon dioxide do we produce per year? Do humans in general produce per year?
Well, Nurhan says billions.
Okay.
Michael has guessed 3 trillion.
Okay.
And I'd like to guess somewhere in the middle, 10 billion.
Okay. So the answer is we produce about 40 billion tons of carbon per year.
So I believe that I was the closest.
Yes. Good,
wow.
Good. Yes.
Tell us more.
Okay. We can start off. Let's go ahead. So I'm the CEO of Inseptima, and Inseptima really focuses on using engineering methodologies to train and educate people on environmental and social corporate governance. So all about the environment, and within that we have engineering embedded in it. So that's what we do. To learn more about Inseptima, you can go to our website there. Next slide, please. So before I jump into climate change, I know Tamara talked a little bit about engineering and renewable energy and how we're not harnessing the energy, harnessing enough energy through renewable methods, and because it's pricey and whatnot. But before I jump into that, I'm just going to go over this is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And these are goals that were developed by the United Nations. For those of you who are not aware of it, the United Nations a few years ago developed Sustainable Development Goals that they need to achieve by 2050. And those goals are really focused on ending poverty, producing clean water, creating jobs for all, life below water, creating an affordable and clean energy. And so these are all the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Some of these goals are most of these goals are climate related. And so when you think about it from an engineering perspective, you go back and they're tracked and traced back to climate change. A lot of what's happening here, based on our analysis and engineering assessments, a lot of what's happening here is a result of us not being able to sustain our environment, and the repercussions are causing a lot of problems for us today. So we can jump into the first topic I want to discuss. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the first thing I want to talk about is really understanding. We need to understand the impacts of climate change. And I know in the previous series I talked about this a little bit, but I want to go a little deeper just so that we can understand how it impacts our daily lives. I think until we understand that, we as individuals need to start engineering ways at home and at work to help change the way we consume energy and the way we use products and services. We need to understand how we have to save more in order to make a change. So 3 of the Sustainable Development Goals that are linked directly to impacts of climate change are taking climate action, creating more life in the sea, and creating more life on land. So basically sustaining what we have, our agriculture, our food, our crops. And you can go to the next slide, please, because that kind of ties back into, our unavailability of food and whatnot. So if you think about it, there are three main areas that are really impacted by climate change. So ecologically, as you've all seen recently with the floods in Germany, and very recently, I think 2 days ago or 3 days ago, there was some serious flooding in London. So those are the direct impacts we're seeing from climate change, right? Desertification. Societal changes include climate migration, people moving from one place to another because of the destruction caused by climate change. And of course, health and disease, because if we don't have the infrastructure that can withstand the type of weather changes coming, we're going to start having issues with hygiene. So you're going to have, waste management systems disrupted. That's going to lead to pollution, the water being polluted, drinking water being polluted. And so that's also an issue. And then economically, supply chain, right? Once we have disruption in produce of anything, the supply chain is going to be impacted. So I think recently, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw a little bit of disruption in supply of food. And we saw how things disappeared from the shelves of the stores, especially toilet paper, right? So COVID-19 is an example of, there being a pandemic, a health pandemic, and that impacting supply chain. Same thing with climate change. If there's like a climate change situation, our supply chain will be disrupted. Next slide, please. So just to give you, again, I think I talked about our coffee disappearing the last time, and Gabe almost had a heart attack, but it's true. Yes, our coffee, is at risk. And the coffee is just one of the many things that are at risk. So up to 75% of Uganda's coffee crop is expected to decrease. And the loss of 25% suitable land for coffee is declining because of the change in the weather and the environment. Again, I mentioned, a 1:23 ratio of migration. So from rural to urban areas, people in conflict zones or, due to environmental stressors like rainfall, will trigger human migration from one area to another. So you're going to have people leaving one place and there being another city completely dense, overpopulated with people. You're going to have more of these situations happening. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so where does engineering fit into all of this? Well, right now, there are lots of technologies that are being used. And so, it's not, climate change is not a dead end situation. There's a way out. The engineering challenge we're having right now is a lot of these solutions are highly, highly, highly expensive, as Tamrat mentioned. And we just don't have the environmental laws and policies to support a lot of these solutions. So that's another reason why, this is an engineering challenge. We're unable to engineer solutions to solve these problems. But again, that's why we're doing this. That's why we're educating people about decentralized technologies so that they're aware. So yeah, we can go to the next slide. So what is decentralized technology? So basically, any technology that's not centralized, so any technology that's not connected to a massive internal grid that has to be run by one specific entity or monopolized. So decent techs are like solar panels on microgrids versus massive power plants with poles and wires. So decentralized technologies actually require less infrastructure. Kind of like when you look at the cloud technology, I would look at the decent tech that way. So what is the role of decent tech, right, in saving the climate, and how can we decarbonize, right, with decent tech? So decent tech can improve the quality and availability of environmental information through different digital platforms, like sharing information. We can provide modular solutions to massive climatological and ecological challenges, and also facilitate grassroots communities engagement through activism, right? Through engagement, putting the word out and educating people about the impacts of climate change and solutions. Next slide, please. So some examples of decentralized technologies and how engineering is playing a big role in helping the climate are, there's a technology called ID Box. So it's a solar powered digital identity and virtual wallet device deployed by UN Women. And so people are able to buy and sell, solar power through this device. We also have the Block Charge, which is a blockchain-based P2P, peer-to-peer platform for supporting electric vehicle charging. So if I'm somewhere and I need to find somewhere to, unlike right now, gas stations are all over the place. It's easy to find a gas station on your GPS. Kind of Block Charge does the same thing. It helps you find the closest electric vehicle charging station around you. So those are ways that technologies are helping us kind of move closer to electric vehicles. I mean, I think I want to buy an electric vehicle. And so one thing I ask myself is, where will I be charging it? So this is a great way to help me and incentivize my electric vehicle, purchase. So next slide, please. Other technologies are pollution abatement and control. Like IBM has a plastic bank where you can actually go on their platform and you can sell your plastics and you can trade it for something else, for digital currency. So that's pretty amazing. That's very encouraging. And so now I'm really, really incentivized to recycle my plastics. You also have like small scale renewable solutions like solar, wind, biomass, microgrid technology, smart meters. All these are decentralized technologies that are not part of a huge, massive power plant, that are changing the way we use, produce, and manage renewable energy. Next slide, please. So that's pretty much it. If you'd like to learn more about decentralized technologies or upcoming global mandates, or what you can do as an individual or a company to really help our current crisis, please feel free to reach out to us. So thank you. Let me know if you have any questions.
Well, thank you, Asma. And in fact, we do have some questions from the audience. Our first question is from Gabe from Washington, D.C. And the question is a multidiscipline webinar a step in the direction of fully understanding and harnessing our global potential, therefore reducing professional silos? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think more of these webinars, geared towards climate change would help people understand the situation and the crisis that we're in right now. I think we've been talking about climate change for many, many, many decades, and I myself personally, was not really pulled into it until I started understanding the impact by talking to experts in the field. And so I think that the more we know, the more informed we are, absolutely, the better we'll be able to work together to really, help one another towards this crisis.
And our next question is also from Gabe, who asks, how can we narrow the gap in understanding among climate change advocates versus climate change deniers? Is this a real issue?
Yeah, I think that, and I'll give you an example. Just like some time ago, somebody posted something on one of the social media platforms about how, the Tesla car was, expensive and this and that, and I think they failed to see or address the current carbonization situation. So we all know that by 2050, if we don't decarbonize as much as we're supposed to, or get to net zero emissions, the world is in big trouble. And when I say big trouble, I mean big trouble, and we're seeing it now. And so I think the facts need to be put out a little more often and more in everybody's face so that people can really stop denying the problem and start accepting it, that the problem does exist.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. And if anyone in the audience has any additional questions for Asma, we will hold all questions till the end of the webinar. So thank you, Asma.
Thank you.
Now for our third and final panelist, we have Jonathan Tessier, professional performance coach. Jonathan Tessier is an accomplished professional with 20 years of success in the field of training and employee development. He has helped lead teams in developing large-scale educational programs from ideation through implementation. He is also a skilled professional coach with a proven ability to generate transformative change in the relations of individuals, project teams, and departmental staff. Hello, Jonathan. How are you today?
I am doing great, Jody Ann. How's it going for you?
Wonderful so far. Looking forward to hearing your presentation on your topic today. Take it away.
All right. Well, thank you. What I found in training and coaching, I used to work for a company that employed a great number of engineers. They made products and machines, and you know, it's funny when people would approach me about doing a training program for engineers, there was always this focus on the fact that they were analytical or they were very left brain, and you needed to make sure that you gave them plenty of problems to solve and math to do and all that. And I don't deny any of that. I've seen that for myself with all the engineers that I've worked with. But I kept thinking that's not the whole picture of the engineering mindset. There's other elements at work that make for very effective engineers. And so that's what I wanted to kind of give you some idea about here in this presentation today. So we're going to talk about two things in regards to that engineering mindset. So next slide, please. Now, all of you know that engineering relates to all of us. It's in everything we do, every single day of our lives. You know, if you crossed a bridge to get to work, there's probably engineering involved in that bridge, right? If you turn on your air conditioner at home just to get more comfortable during the summer, engineering involved in that product. And of course, we all have smartphones, and we can see the impact that engineering of that item alone has had on our lives. Now, you know, as I kind of alluded to a moment ago, engineers are known for thinking very logically. Lots of engineers approach problems in a more methodical way as a result of that logic. But as I kind of teed up, there's something else that's integral to that engineering mindset that's also important, and that is the engineer's ability to be visual and to be creative. And I want to look at these two things and just give you a little exposure about these two skills that also play an important role in very successful engineering. So let's start off with, I'm going to show you one of my favorite commercials. And if you go to the next slide, this commercial is a FedEx commercial and actually comes from Canada. So I don't know if too many people have seen it here in the United States, but let's take a look at it.
Let me get this straight. We have to somehow send this box from here to Germany?
That's the conundrum.
Whoa.
Yeah. Internationally.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Slow down, Einstein.
Let me throw it back at you.
Okay.
The way I understand it.
Right.
This box has to go from here to Germany.
Absolutely.
Box is driving me nuts.
Okay. All right, so we diagrammed it. We've got this part clear. We've got this part clear.
Yep.
This is the only fuzzy part.
The middle
So
bit.
we're working on the fuzzy middle.
Yep.
Okay. Explain the problem to me again.
We have to send this box.
Hey, do you guys know how to get this to India? doesn't have to be this hard. FedEx takes the hassle out of international shipping. Relax, it's FedEx.
Okay, so what I really like about that commercial, and we used it in training for a lot of the programs that we did, was, you know, this whole idea of this fuzzy middle that sometimes is very difficult for someone to explain to somebody else. And a lot of engineers I worked with very much had this fuzzy middle, meaning it was very clear for them in their own mind about what something needed to be, what a process should look like, what a solution could be. But the idea became a challenge in communicating that to somebody else. And that's where visual literacy and creativity become an important part of the engineering mindset. Let's first look at visual literacy as you see here. Now, when we use the term visual literacy, think about the idea that we are surrounded with all kinds of visuals in our daily lives. So we've got written text, we've got art, films, digital images, computer applications, and we are actually processing a lot of information, whether we realize it or not, through visual literacy. So it helps for us to decipher information that we receive through visual images. Visual images help to make things make a lot of sense really quickly, right? So it takes that fuzzy middle that you saw in that commercial there and puts it in a way where we can help other people understand what we're trying to communicate. So that's what visual literacy is all about. I would define it as the ability to understand, use, and create effectively with images. Steve Jobs with Apple once said that having a vision and being able to articulate it to the people around you so that they can understand it is what visual literacy is all about. Visual thinking activates that artistic right side of the brain, which leads to a lot of free ideation. Now, how can that be helpful and important in the world of engineering? Next slide. Visual literacy can help engineers express their ideas and solve technical problems visually. Visual literacy is integral to the successful communication of ideas to others, and it can convey information in a much more succinct way, and it can quickly do that we don't typically find in verbal or oral means of communication. And that's really what it's all about. You can have the greatest idea that can solve for a tremendous problem as an engineer, but if you're not able to communicate that to somebody else who can help you take action on it, you know, it might be stalled in its tracks. So that's why, you know, engineers that are communicating using drawings, diagrams, mental models, concept maps, freehand drawings or sketches, 3D models, just to name a few, are trying to get people to understand concepts that can be very clear in their own mind, but you can't make the assumption that other people can make those leaps to something new and different at the same pace the engineer can. And that's why visual literacy can be such a powerful tool for the engineer. Now, the second part of the engineering mindset that I want to highlight goes hand in hand with visual literacy, and that's the idea of creativity. Next slide. Okay, so here we go. Let's do a little voting going on here. I'm showing you 3 pictures of creative ideas brought about by engineers. Now, which one of these innovations do you prefer? Go ahead and vote in the chat. Do you like innovation number 1, number 2, or number 3? Go ahead and vote for your favorite innovation.
Jonathan, do you
Okay.
mind giving a quick description of each one? Just a
Sure. The first one is, you know how you get those yellow signs after they've mopped some tile floors that say, you know, be careful, it's slippery when wet. And this engineer took that concept and made it look like a banana peel, because we always have that connection between falling and slipping on a banana peel. The second one is to encourage people to throw away trash in receptacles. Why not put a basketball hoop above the trash receptacle to make it fun and incentivize the idea of placing trash where it needs to go? And finally, you don't want to waste any time, right? So why not build in some sort of communication device in the floor of your bathroom, because you spend a lot of time in there sitting around, if you get my drift. Okay.
Well, in the chat, it
All right.
seems as though number 2 is winning by a landslide. And we even have a vote
good.
for all 3.
Yep. I love all 3. It was fun putting this slide together because there were so many I could choose from. But, you know, it's not only are these very creative solutions, but they're also very visual solutions, right? So you can see that connection between visual literacy and creativity. And that's what we have to keep in mind. Behind every innovative idea from an engineer is this image and this visual of that image that they really see in their head. How can we communicate that to other people? And again, it goes back to that question I posed a little bit ago then. Why then don't many people relate creativity and imagination to the profession of engineering and the mindset of an engineer? You know, as I said at the start of this presentation, we typically think of the engineering mindset as rational, methodical, sort of a process approach. But really, when we think about it, that needs to be complemented by the idea of creativity. And to give you an example of why that's so important, when you know, engineers need to think outside the box, right? And to think outside the box requires some visualization of alternative solutions and scenarios. So, you know, what attracts many people to a career in engineering in the first place is the fascination of how things work. But that fascination of how things work doesn't have to only be looked at from the point of view of a process or some sort of method. It can be looked at from the idea of creativity, and creativity can support that approach to engineering as well. Next slide. So why is this all so important? Well, you know, back in 1957, there was this thing called the Sputnik shock. And that came about when all of a sudden the Soviet Union put into space this satellite. And it took everybody, you know, off guard for a moment, like, well, where did that come from, right? And it really was a wake-up call for American engineers to start thinking creatively about issues and problems that need to be solved. So what they realized at the time was that American engineers were good at analytical tasks. They had solid knowledge in science, but were scarce in showing creative abilities. So creativity in engineering is related to the fact that engineering tasks are fundamentally problem-solving tasks, that ability to find technical solutions. But to help with that, engineers need to be able to think about the knowledge they have in science, in technology, in mathematics, and applying those things in a creative manner. Creative techniques are commonly applied in things that we see every day, like advertising or graphic design, right? We see that and we think, well, that's where creative and creativity is most used and placed. But for engineering, the creativity we think of in less evident ways because of that strong sense of the left brain analytical, logical approach. But that does raise the question, which is more important in engineering, this left brain logic and analysis capabilities, or the right brain visual creativity approach? What would you say is which one is more important than the other? Or should one be more emphasized than the other? If you have a thought about that, put it in the chat and let's see what some of you think. Again, is one more important than the other? Should one be more emphasized than the other? Let's hear from a couple of you. What do you think? Is it all about logic? Is it all about creativity? Or some sort of, ratio of the two in between?
Well, from Michael, Michael has shared that it seems like visual design could go a bit toward reducing carbon, keeping people thinking about climate change. Actually, he says some sort of ratio is his response.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Let's see what some more of our colleagues in the audience have to say. I myself, I agree with Michael that there would be some sort of ratio between the two.
Okay, good. Yeah, going back to the idea of reducing carbon and climate change, I think there might be an engineering right solution to all that. But how do you communicate that to other people in a way that they're going to not only understand, but embrace, right? And so, when you think about embracing something and getting passionate about something, certainly that's taken into consideration more than some logical understanding of something. It involves emotions, and emotional side can definitely come from more of that creative side. And as Gabe says in the chat, creativity, getting people to understand a situation, to be able to address it, it may take a little bit of emotion mixed in with all that logic. So that's something to keep in mind as we talk about this idea of what builds or creates or is part of that engineering mindset. So next slide, please. So when we talk about which is more important, I kind of think I like the idea of thinking about in ratios, and sometimes maybe the analytical side needs to take the leadership role and work out some analytical, logical processes that are involved in that idea that you're coming up with. But then maybe it doesn't stop there. Maybe it shifts, and at some point that ratio goes the other direction, and that right brain kicks in with some creative ways to bring those solutions to life so that other people can embrace them and get behind them. So it's, give that food for thought here as we go forward, especially when you think about think about an engineer. Okay, next slide, please. So clearly, when we're talking about building the engineering mindset, we need to think about it more as than just increasing people's abilities to be analytical and to be methodical and process oriented. We need to start thinking about this idea of complementing those skills with visual literacy and with encouraging engineers to be more creative. That's how we can address many of the challenges that humanity is facing. So the good thing and the good news is that educational institutions are beginning to realize this, and they are beginning to offer more and more specific courses and qualifications around visual literacy and creativity. And, I feel good that future generations of engineers will have both the logical and analytical skills to lean on, as well as the creativity and visual literacy skills to help address the challenges that they'll be working on. And so with that, I appreciate everybody on the call listening to my presentation on visual literacy and creativity as part of that engineering mindset.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. We have some commentary from the audience. Gabe has shared that he thinks that creativity is like salt. All you need is a dash. And that he believes all professions need just a little bit of creativity. It's like love. It grows and multiplies. Thank you for that comment, Gabe.
Yeah, I like the salt analogy a lot.
Yes, I do too. I do too. That was a good one. And if anyone else from our audience has any questions for any of our panelists, at this time, feel free to share in the chat, because it is time for Q&A. Now, we've had some wonderful questions and commentary throughout these presentations. And so we'll take these final moments in the webinar to address any additional questions that may be out there in our audience. Well, it seems as though our panelists have answered all the questions from our audience. And so at this time, we'd like to thank all of you for joining us for today's multidiscipline webinar. A special thanks to all of our panelists for sharing from their wealth of knowledge on engineering in everyday life. And we would like to invite you once again to join us next month on August 26th at noon Eastern Time for our next multidiscipline webinar, which will be part 3 and the final portion of on our topic of engineering in everyday life, addressing the global grand challenges of the 21st century. So on August 26th, we will explore more technological possibilities and engineering solutions that are just within our grasps, as well as some that lie just beyond our imaginations. So join us live and expand your horizons as our panel of emerging technological thinkers and thought leaders discuss some more of the grand challenges for engineering in the 21st century. Mark your calendars for August 26th, again at noon Eastern Time, so that you don't miss this third and final installment of this mind-expanding series. Now, as we close this webinar, if you'd like to view a recording of it, we are more than happy to send you a link to the webinar recordings, which can be found on YouTube. We'd also love to hear what you thought of the webinar, so feel free to share them now in our chat. Or if you are watching the replay, feel free to do so in the comments section on YouTube. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Take care and have a wonderful day.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks again to all of our wonderful presenters, and we'll see you on the next webinar.